What is going on, guys? It's the Mad Dragon. Today we are back in Rugby 20. This is a little series we have going on where I chuck a game of rugby on in the background and talk about some of the amazing rugby news that's going on around the world. I'll chuck on a game that is coming up in the upcoming Six Nations. That's a Wales, Scotland. They're going to finish off the Six Nations, but that's not the main subject for today. The main subject is this. Pool stages in the World Cup. Big news has been coming out. So the pool stages in the World Cup are obviously 4 pools of 5 teams, that the 2 winners of each pool go on to the quarterfinals, then on to the semi-finals, and then obviously the final, and 3rd and 4th player loses final. So the way this system works is the top 12 teams, a couple of years before the World Cup, they go off seedings and rankings, and the way this works is they pick the top 12 teams and they get put into their own tiers, and this is what stops there being a pool of New Zealand, South Africa, England, Ireland and Wales all in one. It means, some of the smaller tier nations can actually make it through further, but the big teams all never actually end up playing each other. So you get put into seeds, tier 1, tier 2, and then the other teams play underneath those 12. So some big news that's been coming out today. Normally this is done a couple of years before the World Cup, but I'll chuck on screen right now for you guys so you can see what's going on. So this is the World Cup notice that we've got from the World Rugby Union that's going to be going ahead for the France 2023 World Cup. So what they've done here is they've actually backdated all the restrictions that have come with COVID and all of that stuff. I've seen a lot of teams can't play games have been missed, points have changed, they don't know where people are going to end up. So they're going directly from the ending results of the last World Cup, which has been good for some teams, bad for some other teams. So as you can see on here, it is in like team order for you guys, so you can see. So South Africa obviously won the World Cups there first, then England, New Zealand, Wales, Japan and France, which are going to be up there now for some of the big names. Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Italy, Argentina, Fiji. So these are the top 12 teams now that are going to be going ahead. These guys are definitely through to the World Cup, and these are then going to be put forward into their further tiers afterwards. And then, of course, on top of that, we have the other teams that are going to come through. So we have the Oceania, the Asian Pacific, the Africa, the Americas, Europe, and then the final qualifications. There's a lot of ways about how those teams come into play. I'll go through them quickly in this video just for people who don't know, really. So I'll chuck on screen now so you can see how the seedings are working out. So they're going off of the last World Cup. So there's been a big discussion about this, about whether it was fair or not. Some of the teams have shifted around a lot since here. Ireland, I believe, are currently sat at 4th in the world. They've been doing okay. However, at the end of the World Cup, obviously they lost to New Zealand in the quarterfinals, so they'll be finishing in band 2. And then you have other teams like Wales, who've had a terrible year so far, obviously under new management. They've had a lot of injuries, players missing. They've had a really bad Six Nations, one of the worst Six Nations I seem to remember in most recent history. However, because they lost to New Zealand in the losers final, Wales will be going in at seed number 4, which means they're going to move to band 1, which is going to be interesting. So if you just look at some of these different bands here of where the different teams are going to come in, you could have some really interesting fixtures. I'm not sure how the bands coordinate with what team gets what pool. The actual pools will be drawn up on December 14th as to what will be happening and who will be in what pool. I'm not sure if they end up in direct columns, so like South Africa would be pool 1, New Zealand would be pool 2, England would be pool 3, Wales would be pool 4, and then Ireland, Australia and all those will fit directly underneath them. Because if that goes forward, you could have some big names going in against some smaller names, shall we say, because I don't know about anyone else. I would be quite up for watching a Wales, Japan, Fiji group. I would feel quite happy about Wales hopefully being able to get through that, whereas other teams, you're looking at this, then you've got New Zealand, Australia, Argentina in one group. I mean, that's going to be a death group there for some of the smaller teams trying to get a win. So it does feel a little bit unfair. So let me just break down for you guys how the system works for the other teams, for the band 4 and the band 5, and how they get in. So here's the qualification process for these guys. So the Americas will qualify 2 teams by September of 2022. So they get 2 years more, to decide where these teams are going to come in. The 3rd best team in the region will enter the final qualification, and the tournament Americas 1 and 2 will go immediately through. So the final qualification stages for all these mini sort of cups they hold and then they all play each other, and they are the last team to get in. In the last World Cup, I believe the team that won this, I think, was Romania. I think they beat Germany to get into the 2019 World Cup, and then there was obviously a big question about some interesting activity going on behind the scenes, and they had their place lost out. So they weren't able to get through. I think it was Uruguay that then managed to steal that spot. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. How will Europe get through? The existing Rugby Europe Championship will have 2 qualifying places as well, exactly the same as the Americas, with the 2 best teams across combined 2021 and 2022 editions qualifying directly, and then the 3rd place, of course, entering that final qualification tournament, and that will make up Europe 1 and Europe 2. Africa, the Rugby Africa Cup that will be in 2022, the winner of that directly qualifies, and they will be classed as the Africa 1, and the team that loses that final will go into the final qualification. Oceania, a home and away playoff between Tonga and Samoa in 2021, will determine the direct qualifier of the Oceania region. So that'll be a fun little tournament to watch. Tonga and Samoa, 2 very sort of on-par teams at the minute. I think if you were going to push me, that my immediate brain would go to that Samoa should be winning that, but Tonga have been improving a lot, especially in the last couple of years, so I would maybe even have Tonga down to take that win. But the winner of that becomes the Oceania 1. The loser will then play the Oceania Rugby Cup. 2021 winner in the highest ranked teams country, with the eventual winner contesting the Asia Pacific below as Oceania 2. So there's a whole little jumble up. So if you guys want to look into this further, there is some little articles and stuff you can read. And then finally, there is the Asia Pacific. The winner of the Asian Rugby Men's Championship 2021 will play Oceania 2, home and away. The winner on aggregate will determine the qualifier and the loser to go through the final qualification. So there is a lot of different ways teams get in, which is quite interesting. It's not something I know a great deal about, actually, the World Cup behind the scenes of how teams get in. But I thought it might be interesting just to include in this video, just for you guys to get a little bit more of an understanding about it, for people who are sort of like me, rugby fans, but don't know about a lot of this stuff. The final qualification tournament, the tournament in November 2022 will feature 4 teams playing in a round-robin format, with the winner qualifying for the Rugby World Cup 2023 final qualification winner. Whoosh! so much information to take in. I believe a lot of the times the winner of that Asia Pacific team was Japan, but obviously with them doing so well, managing to get through to the quarterfinals in the last World Cup, and that's the seedings we're going off, Japan won't have to play in that. So it would actually be interesting to see if we can get another Asia team in, which I think would be a lot of fun, actually, to see how some of those hold up. Obviously Japan have been improving vastly, beating both Ireland and Scotland in the last World Cup. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a bit more from them. There was talks about them joining the Six Nations in this sort of 8 Nations autumn tournament that they've got going on, which is still sort of all over the place where that will even go forward, but that's a video for a different time. So a bit of discussion then about this decision. So this is a very different setup from the usual way they do the World Cup decisions. Obviously, normally there's a lot of the seed rankings. Normally the Six Nations comes into play. The Autumn Internationals comes into play. I believe the Southern Hemisphere teams have their own little tournaments and stuff that go on that change the way that the seedings are going to work out, who's ranking where. Winning the Six Nations is a huge boost. Winning the Southern Hemisphere tournaments is a huge boost. But it does mean that every year we tend to get quite a similar set, especially in the top 4. Very usually there will always be a New Zealand, and either South Africa or Australia will be in that top 2, followed by more than likely an England, Wales or Ireland squad. They will normally make up the top 4, and nothing's really changed here. They tend to be the sort of the dominant teams when it comes to the ranked, big tournaments that seem to be able to pull it out the bag. One thing I'm very happy to see is Japan there in the 5th situated spot. I think that'll be so much fun to see Japan come back for this next World Cup. But obviously they changed this up. There was even talk about, from this idea of having this new World Cup thing becoming the normal, which I think would be an interesting turn if the way they're going to do it is that at the end of every World Cup, wherever position you come in that World Cup will define who is the top 12 to go through to the next World Cup. I think you'd see a lot more people driving to get to that pool stage. I know there is currently a big difference in the team ability. We did see, teams like Canada trying to pull it out the bag. Uruguay managed to beat Fiji, which was a lot of fun. And then teams like Japan managing to beat Ireland and Scotland. But these are these sort of rare occurrences where the Tier 2 nations are actually able to beat the Tier 1 nations, which is a lot of fun to watch. I love those games. But there is still quite a vast difference between the Tier 3 segments. Even from Tier 3 to Tier 2, it was so nice to watch Uruguay be able to beat Fiji. That was a big thing for them. They celebrated like they'd won the World Cup. That was such a big deal for them. Obviously, we've seen it in the past. Teams like Canada, being able to score a try against teams like New Zealand is considered, such a good game for them. It would be nice to be able to see those teams be able to perform a little bit better. And hopefully, with this sort of standing now of moving the teams from where you finished in the last World Cup to the next World Cup, could be an interesting change of pace for them. A lot of the times, the Southern Hemisphere teams, definitely in the Autumn Internationals, I think, do tend to play better. I don't know why that is. The Autumn Internationals is a strange setup anyway for me. The way, some teams play the same teams twice, some play them once. They swap every year who's playing who. If you have a year where you're playing New Zealand twice and South Africa and Fiji, you're gonna drop down in the tiers a little bit probably. You can't be expected to win all 4 of those games. Whereas some years you can end up with, Georgia, Fiji, Samoa, and maybe 1 game against Australia. Obviously, it boosts you. And at the end of that, if that generates where you come in the Rugby World Cup, you've got to argue whether you played the harder teams to get there. I'm really looking forward to see what this turns out to be, where the teams go. I'd love to know what you guys think about this. Is this a fair system? Is this not fair? Is it a bit harsh on teams like Ireland, who have now started picking back up after their World Cup? They weren't happy with their World Cup. But obviously they've now dropped down from 4th. They're going to drop down to 8th seed. So they're sort of only just scraping in. Whereas you've got teams like Wales who are really struggling at the minute, but are going to be going in at a 4th seed. Is this unfair to teams the way it could switch up when they weren't expecting it? Is this a much better thing? I, for one, as an avid Wales rugby fan, am quite happy about the seeding. It's nice to know they get to go straight in anyway. I think if the Six Nations had continued where they were, I think Wales could have struggled to maybe even stay in that top 12, to be honest. They were losing everything. I'm looking forward to see how the autumn games are going to affect this now. Obviously, there's this 8 nations being held. I'm not entirely sure how much those are going to affect the rankings of World Rugby. Obviously, there is a slight advantage there because all the games were meant to be being played in London. And then there's been a whole thing going on in the UK about more COVID stuff, so they've sort of changed up a little bit where teams are going to play. I know Wales's first game against Georgia was meant to be played at Parky Scarlets, which is going to be in Wales. They are looking at swapping around some of the games, but I think a lot of the games are going to be played in England, which does give them a slight home advantage. So I don't know if they'll work the point system exactly the same for the world rankings, just because of if one team has the entire home advantage, would that be unfair? I don't know. I'll leave that for you guys to decide. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Just a quick chat generally about the World Cup, some of the news that's come out today. I'd love to know what you guys think. Drop down in the comments what you think about this World Cup setup with the new tier system, with bringing it back in from the old World Cup. Who's looking forward to the next World Cup? I can't wait for that one. It's going to be coming so soon. I'm just looking forward to getting some international rugby back on the scene. But if you enjoyed the video, guys, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I do quite a lot of this little rugby content when interesting news is coming up, and make sure you drop that video a like if you have enjoyed and you found it a little bit informative. I'll see you all next time, guys. Bye bye.